Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Hogwarts is not just a school, it's a place where magic intertwines with tradition, and the futures of young wizards rest in the hands of those who stand at the front of the classroom. Without its professors, Hogwarts would have long turned into a forgotten building lost in the Scottish Highlands. They are its foundation and core. But if you look closer, a lot of uncomfortable questions start to arise. Today, we'll dive into strange and unsettling mysteries surrounding Hogwarts teachers. Enjoy the video! Number 1. Do they even need proper education? Would you trust your child to a teacher who's never set foot in a teacher training college, or one who barely passed their final exams? In the wizarding world, it seems no one even checks. Hagrid, expelled from school and using half a broken wand, freely teaches magical creatures. Trelawney, who barely makes a coherent prediction, has been lecturing for decades. And let's not forget Lockhart, whose defense against the dark arts knowledge turned out to be a complete fraud. So, no qualifications, no background checks. Who actually decides who's allowed to teach children with a wand in their hand? Number 2. How are teachers even hired? The headmaster of Hogwarts holds massive power. He alone chooses the teaching staff. Dumbledore, for instance, made all hiring decisions himself, with no approval from the ministry or any board of governors. But is that really an effective system? One man can appoint anyone, from an ex-convict to a failed seer, to a role that affects the future of hundreds of students. What if a headmaster wants to hire only friends or relatives? Who's watching over that? Number 3. How much power do they really have? Teaching magic isn't easy, especially when a student can accidentally blow up your classroom. But in the books, professors seem to wield nearly unchecked power. They can deduct house points, intimidate, send students into the Forbidden Forest at night, all with no real consequences. Take Professor Snape, for example. He regularly humiliates students, favors Slytherins, and ignores obvious rule-breaking. Where's the line? Who ensures teachers treat students ethically? Number 4. How much do they get paid? Money is a taboo topic, but when it comes to Hogwarts, it's not just sensitive, it's mysterious. We don't know what tuition costs, let alone how much professors earn. Some fans estimate that an experienced teacher might make around 400 galleons per year. Sounds decent, until you remember that 1,000 galleons was enough for the Weasleys to open a shop in Diagon Alley. Maybe teachers are paid in room and board, or perhaps Dumbledore just convinced them all to work for the greater good. Number 5. Do they conduct magical research? We know Dumbledore made huge contributions to magical science, and Snape invented some powerful spells, but what about the rest? The books never tell us if Professor Sprout studies poisonous plants, if McGonagall explores the hidden layers of transfiguration, or if any of them publish in magical academic journals. It feels like Hogwarts isn't a center of magical discovery, just an elite boarding school stuck in grading papers and supervising exams. Number 6. Do professors have a personal life? Perhaps the most mysterious aspect. We see the students' teenage dramas in full view, but the adults, they're like shadows. Does Professor McGonagall have a partner? Does Professor Vector go on dates? Have any of them ever been married? Do they have children? Or are they eternal recluses, forever bound to the castle halls? No wonder Binns died and didn't even notice. Number 7. How did Voldemort curse the position? The most mystical part of the story. Tom Riddle once asked to teach defense against the dark arts, and was denied, first by Dippet, then by Dumbledore. In response, legend says he cursed the position itself, and since then no professor has lasted more than a year. But what does that even mean, to curse a position? It's not an object or a place, it's a concept. Is magic really that precise that it can distinguish between defense against the dark arts professor and combat magic instructor? Could someone break the curse just by renaming the subject? Or did Voldemort truly cast a one-of-a-kind terrifying spell with no equal? Number 8. Are there any teaching guidelines or standards? In Prisoner of Azkaban, Professor Lupin teaches students how to fight a boggart by bringing one into the classroom. The lesson is brilliant, engaging, practical, unforgettable. But earlier that same year, Trelawney makes students stare into crystal balls in total darkness. Lavender Brown sees a grim. Harry sees fog. There's no sign of a shared plan, no curriculum, just two teachers doing things their own way. As Hermione says, divination is one of the most imprecise branches of magic, but that applies to the teaching itself, not just the subject. No book ever mentions a syllabus. No standard testing system is shown, besides the OWLs and NEWTs, which are ministry-run. Inside the school, professors seem to act with full independence. McGonagall demands discipline. Hagrid lets students ride thestrals. Each lesson depends entirely on the teacher's personality and preferences. It's unclear if anyone checks their plans. No committee, no review. At Hogwarts, education is as individual as the wand that casts it. Number 9. How is qualification assessed for vague subjects? In Order of the Phoenix, Professor Umbridge takes one look at Trelawney's divination class and says, "You are incapable of teaching this subject." Harsh, but not entirely wrong. Trelawney spends most of her lessons mumbling vague predictions and terrifying students with fake death omens. "My inner eye sees death," she cries in Prisoner of Azkaban, sending Neville into a panic. And yet Dumbledore keeps her on staff. Why? Because she once made a true prophecy, a single moment of brilliance. But is that enough to teach year after year? Then there's Alecto Carrow, who teaches Muggle studies during Voldemort's reign. Her curriculum is pure hatred. "Muggles are like animals," she tells the students. "This isn't education, it's propaganda." But no one stops her. No board steps in. No one checks her credentials. When a subject is abstract like divination or Muggle studies, there seem to be no standards, no benchmarks, and no accountability. Hogwarts hands over the classroom keys and hopes for the best, and sometimes that hope turns into a nightmare. Number 10. Do professors go through regular evaluations? In Goblet of Fire, Professor Snape brews a complex truth serum without notes or hesitation. His knowledge is clear, but no one ever asks him to prove he's still qualified to teach. The same goes for Professor Sprout, who tends mandrakes with confidence in Chamber of Secrets. "They're still very young," she explains to the class. But does anyone ever evaluate her methods, or ask whether the way she teaches magical plants is the most effective? Hogwarts seems to trust experience over evidence. There's no mention of peer reviews, classroom observations, or ministry inspections. Not once does Dumbledore say, "I'll be sitting in on your lesson today." No evaluation forms, no feedback sessions. Professors teach as they wish for decades. Flitwick, for instance, has likely been demonstrating the levitation charm the same way for years. Swish and flick, he instructs in Philosopher's Stone. But who's to say students couldn't benefit from a new approach, or that he hasn't missed developments in the field of spellwork? The risk is obvious. Without checks, even brilliant minds can grow stale. Hogwarts could become a museum of magical traditions, not a school preparing wizards for a changing world. What if better ways exist to tame hippogriffs or detect dark magic? The books never explore this. No magical teaching license is renewed. No standards are enforced. At Hogwarts, once you're hired, you're trusted forever, until a curse, a scandal, or a centaur sends you packing. Number 11. Who replaces a teacher in case of absence? In Order of the Phoenix, when Professor Umbridge fires Trelawney, the divination tower falls silent. Students wander, confused. "Are we still having class?" one asks. No one seems to know. Eventually, Dumbledore hires Firenze the centaur, but the gap between the two is awkward and unplanned. For several days, it's unclear who's teaching what. If this is how the school handles staff changes, it raises serious questions. Is there no system for immediate replacement? No standby professor waiting in the wings? When Lupin fell ill during Prisoner of Azkaban, Snape was sent to cover defense against the dark art. He took the opportunity to assign werewolf-themed homework, nearly exposing Lupin's secret. That moment says everything. Replacements are not just rare, they're improvised. There's no indication Snape had been briefed or trained for the switch. He simply stepped in, used the chance to push an agenda, and left students unsettled. Hogwarts, it seems, relies on convenience rather than structure. No substitute network is ever mentioned. If McGonagall misses a day, who teaches Transfiguration? Does Flitwick fill in, or do classes get cancelled altogether? It's a mystery. The series offers no hint of a support system, no magical substitute roster, no teaching assistants, just the hope that no one gets sick or dies, because when they do, the classroom goes dark. Number 12. Who oversees classroom safety? When Professor Lupin brought a full-grown boggart into the classroom, he didn't ask anyone for permission. He simply wheeled the wardrobe in, smiled, and said, "Nothing like a good practical lesson." The students laughed, but what if that boggart had turned into a Dementor for Neville and caused a panic? No safety measures, no backup, just trust in Lupin's instincts, and this wasn't unique. In Chamber of Secrets, Professor Lockhart released a cage of Cornish pixies without the faintest idea of how to control them. "Let's see what you make of them," he beamed, seconds before chaos erupted and Seamus Finnegan was dangling from the chandelier. Potions class wasn't any safer. Cauldrons frequently exploded in Half-Blood Prince. Ron accidentally consumes a poisoned mead during a private gathering, and only Professor Slughorn's hesitation nearly costs Ron his life. Who's responsible when a student is harmed? Is there a magical version of a health and safety inspector? No one ever visits the classrooms to check if hippogriffs are restrained, if volatile ingredients are stored properly, or if cursed artifacts are kept far from curious hands. It seems every professor creates their own standard, and some don't bother with one at all. The only person who appears to address risk at all is Madame Pomfrey, and even she shows up after things go wrong. There's no preventive system in place, no school-wide rules. When Draco is slashed open by Sectum Sempra in Half-Blood Prince, Snape storms in only because he's the teacher on duty, not because there's an official safety protocol. Hogwarts, for all its enchantments, treats danger as part of education. One gets the sense that if you survive your 7 years, the diploma is just a bonus. The real test was staying alive. Number 13, can a professor switch the subject they teach? For years, Severus Snape taught potions with a bitter glare and clenched jaw, but his heart was always elsewhere. "Defense against the dark arts is my specialty," he declared in the Sorcerer's Stone, his voice sharp with resentment. He wanted that job more than anything, yet Dumbledore denied him. Repeatedly. The real question is why. Was it fear of what Snape might teach, or a hidden rule within Hogwarts itself? If a brilliant mind like his wasn't allowed to change subjects for nearly 2 decades, does that mean the system is rigid or simply governed by personal politics? When Snape finally got his wish in The Half-Blood Prince, it was almost theatrical. "The post has finally been given to Professor Snape," Dumbledore said, as if revealing a secret long kept. But nothing in the text explains how that decision was made. Did Snape take a test, submit a magical resume? Or did Dumbledore just snap his fingers and say, "Very well, the job is yours"? It feels arbitrary, even dangerous. If a subject so critical could be handed over without public reasoning, what does that say about the standards behind it? Now imagine if Professor McGonagall suddenly wanted to switch from Transfiguration to ancient runes. Would anyone stop her? She's brilliant, yes, but is she qualified to decipher millennia-old spellwork? The books never mention any retraining or certification process. There's no board of education, no interviews, no guidelines, just Dumbledore's quiet authority behind every appointment. Hogwarts runs not on policy but on trust, or perhaps on assumptions. That, in a world filled with curses and magical accidents, is rather terrifying. If subjects are interchangeable depending on the director's mood, what's to stop Slughorn from becoming the next flying instructor? What if Hagrid decided he wanted to teach history of magic instead of feeding blast-ended scroots? The lack of transparency creates risk, because even if someone wants to teach a new subject, that doesn't mean they should. Hogwarts may be full of magic, but even magic needs rules. Number 14, do teachers get vacation time? Minerva McGonagall stood at the edge of the Black Lake, her boots sinking into the soft summer grass. The castle loomed behind her, quiet for once, the echo of students' footsteps finally gone. It was mid-July, the corridors of Hogwarts were empty, the great hall closed, and yet she remained. "Someone has to stay behind," she had once said after the Battle of Hogwarts, her voice tired. But the truth lingered behind her spectacles. No one had told her to. No one had told her she could leave. Hogwarts follows a clear calendar. 9 months of school, 3 months of summer. Students go home, but where do the teachers go? Do they rest? Or are they buried under scrolls, rebuilding classrooms, repairing moving staircases? After the final battle, entire wings were destroyed. Who cleaned the soot from the Ravenclaw Tower? Who re-enchanted the suits of armor? Certainly not ghosts, and Filch, squib though he is, could hardly mend magical burns in stone. Someone had to stay and fix it. Someone like Professor Flitwick, who with trembling hands was seen in The Half-Blood Prince conjuring protective charms for the school. Is that summer work, or unpaid overtime? The books never tell us what happens to the staff after June. We see professors teaching, scolding, dueling, with spum, but never resting. Does Hagrid take Fang and vanish into the Forbidden Forest for weeks? Does Professor Sprout retreat to her greenhouse with a cup of elderflower wine, and no students to damage her devil's snare? "I'll be in my office," said Snape in the Philosopher's Stone. He always was, day and night. Did anyone ever tell him he could go on holiday? Or did he believe, like most Hogwarts staff seem to, that loyalty was its own kind of prison? And who even approves a vacation? The Board of Governors? The headmaster? In the Chamber of Secrets, Dumbledore is suspended, and yet no mention is made of the chain of command when it comes to staff well-being. What if Madam Hooch wanted a week off to visit family in Wales? Would Peeves be left in charge of Quidditch practice? Hogwarts runs on unseen labour, magical, loyal, unspoken. Perhaps that's the real reason Binns never left. He died at his desk because he never believed he had the right to leave. Number 15. Do professors have assistants? In the shadowy dungeons of Hogwarts, where cauldrons simmer and potion fumes twist into strange shapes, Professor Snape stood alone behind his desk, sifting through a towering pile of parchment. Each sheet carried the clumsy scrawl of a first year, or the too confident curves of a 7th year, hundreds of essays on the properties of Valyrian root, written in varying degrees of competence, all waited for his ink-black judgment. There was no mention in the books of anyone helping him with this task, no assistants, no teaching aides, no house elves openly participating, just Snape, his quill, and the relentless expectation that he personally evaluate every single student's work. Considering the sheer volume of classes he taught, from Gryffindor and Slytherin joint lessons to Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff sessions, the absence of any help defies logic. And yet Hogwarts has always operated in this mysterious fashion. Professors are presented as solitary figures, burdened with the full weight of both instruction and administration. Minerva McGonagall, stern and brilliant, teaches transfiguration with unwavering precision, but who helps her manage dozens of students practicing dangerous magical transformations daily? Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts, she tells them in the Philosopher's Stone. And yet we are expected to believe she supervises, manages and grades all student progress without so much as a notepad floating beside her. The logistics are baffling. Charms class under Professor Flitwick offers another curious example. As a former dueling champion and head of Ravenclaw House, his responsibilities are many. From teaching spells like the summoning charm, Accio, to supervising OWL-level enchantments, Flitwick is portrayed as a joyful, capable teacher. But even joy cannot conquer the labor of marking dozens of spellwork journals or practical evaluations. Who checks to see if the wand movement was correct? Who observes the students casting their spells when Flitwick is momentarily distracted? The books remain entirely silent. One of the few hints that a system might exist beneath the surface comes from the suggestion that house elves are more integrated into Hogwarts than it appears. In the Goblet of Fire, we learn that the kitchens are entirely staffed by house elves, dozens of them working invisibly to keep the school running. Hermione is shocked by this revelation and launches SPEW, but her campaign fizzles quickly. While the elves' culinary duties are acknowledged, there is a lingering suspicion that their roles may extend further. Are they responsible for polishing cauldrons in the potions classroom? Do they fetch books for professors or clean after failed experiments in the astronomy tower? The books do not confirm this, but the question hangs in the air like an unanswered riddle. Defense against the dark arts, a subject notorious for its high turnover in teaching staff, should provide a scenario ripe for assistantship. When Gilderoy Lockhart took over, his incompetence was matched only by his vanity. Students were left to read his own books and survive a classroom full of Cornish pixies without guidance. Surely someone in the school must have seen the danger? And later, when Remus Lupin taught the subject brilliantly in The Prisoner of Azkaban, his personalized attention to students like Neville Longbottom seemed extraordinary. Lupin knew each student's fears and weaknesses, tailoring lessons to help them grow. But how could one man do all this while grading essays, preparing lessons, and fending off the physical toll of lycanthropy? Perhaps the closest the series ever comes to a true assistant is in the form of Madame Pince, the Hogwarts librarian. Her role is clear: guardian of knowledge, keeper of rare tomes, and fierce protector of library etiquette. Yet even she appears to work alone. There is no library aide, no student helping to reshelve books or manage late returns. This is even more confusing when one considers the sheer scale of the library, which must house thousands of magical volumes, many of them dangerous or restricted. The very idea that one person, however terrifying, manages this ecosystem without support borders on absurdity. The lack of assistance becomes even more troubling in subjects involving physical danger. In The Half-Blood Prince, we see students experimenting with dangerous potions. Ron is nearly killed by a poisoned mead meant for Dumbledore. Katie Bell is cursed by a necklace. While these incidents occur outside classrooms, they suggest that the boundary between learning and lethal risk is thin at Hogwarts. In such an environment, wouldn't teaching assistants be not just useful, but necessary for safety? In real-world magical institutions, or even mundane ones, dangerous labs are managed by entire teams. Hogwarts seems to rely on the vigilance and omnipresence of a single instructor per subject, with no safety net in place. Herbology, taught by Professor Sprout, also paints a curious picture. Plants like the mandrake, devil's snare, and venomous tentacula are not just magical, they're actively hostile. Students work in greenhouses where one wrong move could result in injury or worse. Professor Sprout is often depicted as bustling about, but never once is she shown with a teaching aid. During the mandrake rearing in Chamber of Secrets, the entire school's restoration from petrification depended on her work. Did she care for all the plants by herself? Who watered them, trimmed them, kept them alive? The logistics again strain belief. Even the astronomy classes held at midnight on Hogwarts' tallest tower raise difficult questions. Professor Sinistra must oversee students as they study the skies in dangerous, icy conditions. Equipment like telescopes, charts, and quills must be distributed and collected. Observations must be graded, and this happens while other professors are likely asleep, making her a solitary figure both physically and professionally. It is a haunting image, a lone teacher on a dark tower balancing parchment in the wind while her students attempt to chart Venus. Number 16. Who monitors their mental well-being? In the darkened corridors of Hogwarts, far from the bustling chatter of the Great Hall and the glow of floating candles, lies an unspoken truth about the most famous school of witchcraft and wizardry. No one is watching over the mental health of the faculty. The teachers, tasked with molding the magical minds of future generations, operate under extraordinary pressure in an environment that often seems to shift between whimsical chaos and outright danger. From the first book to the last, there is no mention of a school counselor, no evidence of internal support systems, and certainly no time set aside for emotional reflection. The adults in Hogwarts are left to fend for themselves in a castle that seems to thrive on psychological strain. Take Severus Snape, for instance. A man whose life has been a long chain of trauma, bullied in childhood, rejected by the woman he loved, and ultimately recruited as a double agent in the most dangerous game of all. And yet, Hogwarts never offers him peace. His bitterness, his cruel sarcasm, and his overt favoritism are not just personal flaws, but the visible scars of prolonged emotional neglect. In The Order of the Phoenix, Snape's pain leaks out when he snaps at Harry during occlumency lessons, hurling cold, sharp words that barely mask his wounded soul. You are just like your father, lazy, arrogant. But this isn't just about Harry or James Potter. It's about Snape's quiet descent into isolation, enabled by a system that demands obedience but offers no healing. Sybil Trelawney, the divination professor, is often dismissed as a fraud, a comic relief in shawls and sherry fumes. Yet beneath the crystal ball and the exaggerated predictions lies a deeply insecure woman, terrified of irrelevance. Her moments of genuine prophecy are rare and involuntary, and the rest of her teaching is a facade, clumsily held together by incense and vague omens. When Dolores Umbridge tries to fire her in The Order of the Phoenix, Trelawney breaks down completely, sobbing in front of the entire student body. This is not merely professional failure, it is emotional collapse, the unraveling of someone who has received no mentorship, no support, no validation. Dumbledore intervenes, but it is telling that his response is logistical, not emotional. He lets her stay, but who comforts her? Rubeus Hagrid is another cautionary tale. Half-giant, expelled as a child, and forced to live on the edge of the Forbidden Forest, Hagrid becomes both beloved and pitied by those around him. His affection for dangerous creatures, his sentimental nature, and his loyalty often overshadow his glaring emotional vulnerabilities. In The Goblet of Fire, after Rita Skeeter's article mocks him for being a half-giant, Hagrid retreats into his hut, refusing to come out, paralyzed by shame. It takes Dumbledore's public words to coax him back, but again no one truly sits with Hagrid, asks him how he feels, or helps him work through the humiliation. Instead, he's handed a task or given a drink. Minerva McGonagall, sharp and composed, is perhaps the most functional of all the staff members, yet even she is not immune to the toll. Her stoic nature masks decades of sacrifice. A woman who watched generation after generation of children march into war, she never cracks, at least not publicly. But what happens behind her closed doors? Does she weep for the students lost to Voldemort's reign, for Lily and James, for Fred? We never find out. The silence surrounding her grief is deafening. And while strength is admirable, unprocessed grief can harden into something brittle and cold. Hogwarts offers her no reprieve, no room to mourn. Remus Lupin, perhaps the most tragic example of this absence of care, is a man forced into secrecy and shame. He arrives at Hogwarts during Harry's third year, bringing warmth, compassion, and an effective teaching style. Yet even he is driven away by a society that sees his condition, lycanthropy, as a threat. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, after it is revealed he is a werewolf, he resigns immediately. Parents will not want a werewolf teaching their children. And what does the staff do? They let him leave. No support, no protest, no argument. Remus walks away alone, again. The message is clear. If you're broken, there's no place for you here. Even professors like Gilderoy Lockhart, a man more interested in fame than teaching, reveal something dark about the Hogwarts hiring process. Lockhart was a fraud, yes, but also a man so consumed by his delusions that he risked everything to maintain them. By the Chamber of Secrets, he ends up in St. Mungo's, completely memoryless, the victim of his own botched spell. But had anyone on the staff ever taken him seriously enough to question his credentials or even his mental stability? Hogwarts let him teach children despite glaring warning signs. They laughed, they gossiped, but they didn't intervene. The pressures are not merely emotional, they are physical and existential. Professors are routinely placed in life-threatening situations. The defense against the dark arts post, famously cursed, became a revolving door of doomed educators. Quirrell, possessed by Voldemort; Lupin, forced out; Moody, impersonated; Umbridge, nearly trampled by centaurs; Snape, finally murdered. Every year the staff watched a colleague fall, yet there was no trauma response, no counseling, not even a school-wide day of reflection. Life at Hogwarts simply carried on. Number 17. What are the boundaries between teachers and students? Of all the mysteries Hogwarts has offered us, from moving staircases to hidden chambers, one question remains oddly untouched. How exactly are relationships between teachers and students regulated in this iconic school? We understand the most obvious rule: no professor is allowed to harm a student physically. Dolores Umbridge's use of a blood quill was condemned by every decent character in the series, and even Dumbledore moved against her once the Ministry's grip weakened. But what about emotional boundaries? Where is the line between mentorship and favoritism, between discipline and emotional abuse? The books provide no rulebook, no clear ministry decree, no teacher handbook. Instead, everything at Hogwarts seems guided by unwritten codes of honor, or worse, personal whim. Consider the relationship between Professor Lupin and Harry. The man was more than a teacher. He became a surrogate godfather, a gentle protector who gave Harry hope and insight when no one else could. When he first introduced Harry to the Patronus charm, it wasn't just a lesson, it was a personal mission. Lupin, who knew Harry's parents intimately, offered more than education. He offered comfort. He once said, "You have your mother's eyes." And it wasn't mere observation, it was a connection, a quiet gesture of emotional support. But was that appropriate? Was Lupin stepping beyond the professional role of a teacher? While it's easy to praise this as heartwarming, it also opens the door to favoritism. Other students didn't receive that level of attention. Lupin didn't train Neville or Seamus to fight Dementors. Why was Harry singled out? Who decides when a teacher has crossed an invisible line? The other side of this coin is, of course, Severus Snape. His relationship with Harry wasn't just complex, it was traumatic. While Lupin offered sanctuary, Snape inflicted wounds that were emotional and deeply personal. His hatred of James Potter bled into every classroom interaction with Harry. He humiliated the boy in front of his peers, constantly accused him of arrogance, and perhaps most disturbingly, invaded his mind through occlumency without proper care or empathy. In Order of the Phoenix, Snape sneered at Harry. Control your emotions, discipline your mind. But he offered no guidance on how to do so, no kindness, only scorn. Where were the safeguards? Where was the oversight? Who monitored teachers like Snape to ensure they weren't damaging their students mentally? McGonagall, perhaps the most balanced professor at Hogwarts, still provides a telling example. She was stern, fair, and professional, yet her attachment to her Gryffindors, especially Harry, was unmistakable. In Philosopher's Stone, when she sees Harry's flying ability, she immediately recruits him for the Quidditch team, despite first years traditionally being banned from playing. Was this bending the rules for potential, or was it a teacher allowing personal excitement to cloud professional judgment? While McGonagall never abused her power, her decision demonstrates how much personal discretion Hogwarts professors hold. There's no council, no ethics board, no standard protocol, just instincts and conscience. Even Hagrid, with all his warmth, occasionally blurred the lines. As a gamekeeper turned professor, his affection for Harry, Ron, and Hermione often placed them in danger. He invited them to visit a dangerous dragon hatchling, took them into the Forbidden Forest, and relied on their loyalty to protect Buckbeak. These were not standard educational experiences, and they were risky emotional adventures born out of affection and trust. But what if a student had died? What systems existed to review Hagrid's conduct? His good intentions are undeniable, but so are the risks. It wasn't love that was lacking at Hogwarts. It was regulation. Then there is Dumbledore, whose enigmatic leadership offered both brilliance and troubling opacity. He allowed Snape to teach for years despite clear evidence of emotional cruelty. He placed Harry with the Dursleys without preparing him or checking in regularly. He withholds vital information about Voldemort's Horcruxes until the very end of Half-Blood Prince, admitting, "I make mistakes like the next man. In fact, being, forgive me, rather cleverer than most men, my mistakes tend to be correspondingly huger." But who holds Dumbledore accountable? No one. His ethics, his rules. When even the headmaster is guided only by internal morality, what chance is there for standardized teacher conduct? Even more concerning is the fact that emotional dependency is sometimes rewarded. Harry seeks comfort from Lupin, guidance from Dumbledore, and even warmth from McGonagall, but he also becomes isolated, emotionally attached to a few adults who are not his guardians, and shaped by those attachments. After Sirius dies, no one assigns Harry a counselor. There's no mental health department at Hogwarts. Lupin disappears, and Dumbledore becomes distant. A boy mourning his godfather is left alone because the staff has no structure, no procedures for care beyond classroom walls. Meanwhile, favoritism at Hogwarts runs rampant. Snape's treatment of Slytherin is laughably biased. He deducts points from Gryffindor for breathing too loudly, yet turns a blind eye to Draco Malfoy's clear violations. In Chamber of Secrets, he punishes Harry and Ron for flying the car to school, but there's no balanced discussion. It's all fury and contempt. When a teacher's personal biases dominate classroom discipline, how do students feel safe? And if they don't feel safe, how can they thrive? Dolores Umbridge, ironically, represents the opposite extreme. She enforced rules with fanatical cruelty, yet claimed to follow ministry protocol. Her tyranny revealed how dangerous excessive regulation can be when driven by sadism rather than ethics. But her downfall was not a result of student complaints. It took a literal rebellion. There's no Hogwarts HR department, no formal complaint system. Students can either accept their teacher's behavior or plot revolution. Is that a healthy model for education? Number 18. What happens to retired teachers? At Hogwarts, time behaves strangely. The stone corridors do not echo with the weight of passing centuries, but seem instead to trap it, like an ancient clock that never ticks. Within its walls, professors remain constant fixtures, faces etched in memory, robes swept along the same staircases for decades. And yet behind the mystery of transfiguration spells and potions classes lies a question so simple and human that the books never dared to answer it. Do the professors of Hogwarts ever retire? Minerva McGonagall, with her stern expression and tartan shawls, has been at Hogwarts for as long as anyone can remember. Even Dumbledore, when he was headmaster, deferred to her sharp mind and steady hand. But after the Battle of Hogwarts, when the dust settled and new generations took their seats at long house tables, McGonagall remained. She rose to headmistress, a natural progression, and yet, even as years passed, she did not disappear into quiet obscurity. Where others may have slipped away into the folds of time, she stood at the helm, her voice commanding silence in the great hall. The question lingered, how long could one woman serve a school, even one built by magic? One cannot help but think of Professor Binns, the ghostly history of magic teacher who, as recounted by Hermione Granger, simply got up to teach one day and left his body behind. The implication was both comic and terrifying. Had he no plan to ever stop teaching? Was death not a boundary for him, nor a conclusion? In the context of Hogwarts, it seems that teaching is less a profession than a permanent state of being, a magical contract never rescinded. If a professor can carry on posthumously, where then is the line of retirement drawn? The lack of clarity becomes even more pronounced when we remember figures like Professor Sprout, the tireless head of Hufflepuff, whose hands were forever stained with dragon dung and soil. She had a practical warmth, a gardener's patience, and a knack for calming even the most nervous of first years. But as Harry's children walked the same grounds years later, her name faded from mention. Did she quietly retire to a greenhouse by the sea, content to tend mandrakes without interruption? Or did the magical community simply let her vanish into silence? Not a single staff member in the books is shown officially retiring. Even Dumbledore, at over 100 years old, never stepped down. He perished in service, still working, still responsible, still carrying the fate of the wizarding world on his half-moon spectacles. His death felt less like the end of a career and more like the final act of an exhausting play. His age never seemed a reason to stop, only death did. Is that the reality of Hogwarts staff? That they labor until they vanish, quite literally? It raises a more unsettling implication. Is there a system at all to support old professors in their final years? Does Hogwarts have a pension scheme? One imagines a wizard's version of a pension might involve Gringotts accounts sealed with goblin-made locks or enchanted vaults that replenish themselves yearly, but no mention is made of such systems. Retirement seems as absent from Hogwarts as computer science or common sense. There's no staff room chatter about leaving, no farewell ceremonies, no golden watches, magical or otherwise. The matter grows more peculiar when one considers that the school itself seems to resist change. Teachers arrive rarely and leave even less frequently. Quirrell's departure was not due to a peaceful retirement, but a death brought on by dark magic and a shared skull with Voldemort. Lupin taught for only a year before resigning under social pressure. Mad-Eye Moody's teaching stint wasn't even his own. Gilderoy Lockhart's fate was a tragic spiral into St. Mungo's. All these departures were forced, accidental, tragic, never chosen. And what of the support system? Is there a Hogwarts Professors Union, a veteran teachers' circle that meets every full moon in Hogsmeade to toast to their past glories? Do they share stories over butterbeer, remembering the days of Peeves and cauldron explosions? There's no indication of such camaraderie. If the teachers leave, they vanish from the narrative like dreams upon waking. Hogwarts consumes their identities. Even the ghosts seem a part of this cycle. The Fat Friar, the Bloody Baron, the Grey Lady, all tied to Hogwarts for eternity. It begs a question that's hard to ignore. Is becoming a ghost a career option in the school charter? When a professor dies, is there a clause that lets them transition into spectral service? Professor Binns sets a haunting precedent. Did he volunteer to remain, or was it expected of him? Was it even his choice? Take Madame Hooch, for instance, the fierce, yellow-eyed broomstick instructor who appeared in Harry's early years. She taught students to fly, scolded them for carelessness, and kept Quidditch fair with sharp eyes and a whistle. But she slowly faded from the pages as the series progressed. Did she retire? Did she fall ill? Or was she simply no longer relevant to Harry's journey? The books don't say, and the silence feels intentional. It almost seems that to teach at Hogwarts is to surrender the option of an ordinary life. The castle accepts you, then holds you. Perhaps it is enchanted that way. Those who dedicate themselves to its halls become bound by loyalty or by magic. One wonders if even Sybil Trelawney, despite her oddness and frailty, would ever be allowed to leave. Her tower room was more prison than office, and yet she stayed. Even after Umbridge humiliated her, Trelawney remained, muttering prophecies and sipping sherry in solitude. This strange resistance to retirement stands in contrast to the rest of the wizarding world. Auras age, shopkeepers pass their businesses to their children, even ministers for magic eventually move on. Yet Hogwarts, the very heart of magical Britain, seems frozen. It's not only the moving staircases that defy time, it's the people. One suspects there's something deeper than tradition at work, a quiet enchantment, a vow taken in youth, perhaps sealed by wand and word. Imagine, if you will, a Hogwarts retirement cottage perched near the Black Lake, a cozy home for those who once taught charms and divination, now enjoying tea while watching the squid ripple the water. Yet no such place is ever spoken of, and if it did exist, wouldn't Harry, who remained so deeply tied to Hogwarts, have visited it? McGonagall would have earned such peace. So too Flitwick, the cheerful charms master who seemed ageless but must, at some point, have longed for rest. The silence is telling. The absence of retirement ceremonies, fond goodbyes, or even obituaries suggests that the castle keeps its own, that perhaps once you accept your post, your soul entwines with its ancient walls. A chilling thought, if true. Is that the unspoken contract, a life of service, sealed in magic, ending only when death or transformation frees you? It's hard not to wonder what Hermione Granger thought of this as Minister for Magic. Would she have proposed reforms, implemented teaching limits, mandated vacation days? One hopes so, but even then, Hogwarts may be too powerful, too sentient to allow such ordinary systems to take root. Its culture is older than any law, and it does not bend easily. Perhaps this is why the students look at their professors with such reverence. There's a kind of fear in their respect, as if they know on some unconscious level that these are not just teachers, they are guardians of something ancient, something that does not release its servants. Their robes are not just uniforms, but symbols of magical vows. In the end, the question of retirement is not only administrative, it's spiritual. Hogwarts is more than a school. It is a sanctum, a relic, a trap of stone and memory. And those who teach there, willingly or not, become part of its legend. There are no farewell parties because there are no goodbyes, only echoes, only ghosts. Number 19. Who trains professors in teaching methods? Minerva McGonagall was a brilliant witch. There was no doubt about it. Her skill with transfiguration was legendary, her duels formidable, and her loyalty to Hogwarts unwavering. But the question few dared to ask was this: who had ever taught Minerva McGonagall how to teach? She ran her classroom with a strict hand and an even stricter tone, but did that make her an effective educator? Or did her authority stem from fear, not pedagogical training? In the wizarding world, brilliance in spellwork often substitutes for actual teaching ability, but can a genius in magic automatically become a good teacher? Hogwarts seems to assume so, and therein lies the troubling silence of its educational foundation. Gilderoy Lockhart was perhaps the most glaring example of this failing. A man obsessed with his reflection, more concerned with signatures than spells, was given free rein to teach children how to defend themselves against curses and dark creatures. He dazzled the public with fabricated tales and hair care tips, but when faced with an actual Cornish pixie, arguably a minor nuisance, he lost control of the classroom within minutes. The pixies humiliated him, tied him up, and left the students to fend for themselves. "I must ask you not to mess up my hair," he told them in Chamber of Secrets, while chaos erupted around him. Who in their right mind decided this man was qualified to teach? The deeper issue isn't just about one incompetent professor, it's about a system, or lack thereof. There is no mention, anywhere in the series, of Hogwarts offering its professors any form of instructional training. No workshops, no mentoring, no teaching practicum. Most troubling of all, there seems to be no magical equivalent of a pedagogical faculty. Wizards train in magic, not in teaching, and yet they are handed groups of volatile, emotionally unstable teenagers and expected to shape them into functioning witches and wizards. Is this faith or negligence? Consider the case of Professor Snape. An undisputed master of potions, he brewed with surgical precision. But in the classroom, he ruled through intimidation. He mocked students, played favorites, and created a learning environment saturated with anxiety. "I can teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory," he famously told Harry, and even put a stopper in death. But what he couldn't do was create a space where every student felt safe to fail, and therefore to learn. His brilliance was never in doubt, but his cruelty made his classroom a battleground, not a sanctuary. Did anyone at Hogwarts ever observe his lessons, offer feedback, demand professional standards? And what about Hagrid? Beloved, kind, and deeply compassionate, he had no formal education beyond his 3rd year. Yet Dumbledore trusted him enough to place him in charge of a subject that could literally kill a student if handled carelessly. Buckbeak nearly maimed Draco Malfoy, not out of malice, but because a teenager was allowed near a magical beast with minimal oversight. Hagrid was doing his best, perhaps better than Lockhart or Umbridge ever did, but he had no training, no curriculum development experience, and no classroom management strategies. Hogwarts didn't offer him any guidance. It simply handed him a title and hoped for the best. Even Remus Lupin, often considered the most effective defense against the dark arts teacher in Harry's years, appears to have received no preparation for teaching. His success in the classroom came not from pedagogical training, but from empathy, lived experience, and common sense. He engaged students through practical lessons and encouraged them to think critically. His Boggart lesson remains one of the most effective in the series. But was Lupin's effectiveness simply a lucky accident, the result of a rare combination of humility and skill? If he had failed, would anyone have stepped in to help him improve? Dolores Umbridge provides a dark twist to the same question. She came from the ministry armed with bureaucracy and rigid doctrine. Her lessons were sterile, theory-based, and cruelly impersonal. She rejected hands-on experience, undermined Dumbledore, and punished students with physical pain. Yet even she, for all her flaws, had some idea of lesson structure. But that only underscores the problem. The ministry, not Hogwarts, provided her framework. And it was deeply flawed. If the school itself had a stronger system of teacher development, perhaps Umbridge's methods could have been resisted with something better than teenage rebellion. Trelawney, the divination teacher, was another case of chaos in silk scarves. Her classroom was more séance than seminar. She swayed between trances and tea leaves, predicting death every few weeks and confusing real prophecy with performance. The students, including Hermione, often dismissed her lessons as nonsense. If being a seer is so rare, Hermione once asked, why is it being taught as a subject at all? And more to the point, why was it being taught by someone who could not differentiate between her own mystical babble and a true, life-altering prophecy? No one corrected her, no one coached her. She simply continued, year after year, wrapped in perfume and delusion. Firenze, the centaur who replaced her for a time, was wiser, calmer, and more grounded in cosmic patterns. But he too lacked formal training in teaching. His classroom was literally transformed into a forest. Aesthetic, perhaps, but did that change help the students learn? Did anyone assess whether his celestial lectures made sense to 11-year-olds? Hogwarts seemed to treat every teacher as a freelancer, trusted to invent a curriculum on the spot, with no oversight or coordination with other staff. In the Muggle world, such an approach would be considered reckless at best. Even Professor Binns, the ghost who taught history of magic, demonstrates the systemic rot. He died and continued teaching out of habit, but no one noticed the difference. His lessons were so dull that students like Ron used them for napping. He read from a text in a monotone voice, refused to engage with students, and was apparently never evaluated. That a dead man could retain his job simply because he showed up proves the absence of quality control. In a school supposedly grooming the best magical minds, that is both absurd and tragic. The lack of teacher training is more than just a narrative oversight. It reveals a culture within the wizarding world that undervalues education as a craft. Spells are respected, knowledge is prized, but the art of transmitting that knowledge forgotten. There is no Hogwarts School of Education, no magical academy for aspiring teachers, no post-NEWT training in pedagogy. The system assumes that skill in magic translates into the ability to teach it. But as every frustrated student could attest, that's far from the truth. It's not that Hogwarts doesn't care. It's that it doesn't know how to care. The institution was built on tradition, not progress. Professors often teach alone, isolated in their disciplines, rarely collaborating across subjects. A charms teacher may never know what the herbology teacher is doing. There is no evidence of staff meetings where best practices are discussed or new methods are shared. Dumbledore, as headmaster, offers no visible mentorship program. New teachers aren't guided, they are tested. If they survive, figuratively or literally, they stay. One wonders how many talented witches and wizards were lost because they failed as teachers. Not because they lacked brilliance, but because they lacked training. The system punishes the unprepared but refuses to prepare them. Teaching in the wizarding world is seen not as a learned skill, but as an assumed one. There is no apprenticeship, no student teaching, no peer review, just a classroom and a wand, and the hope that magic alone will do the rest. Had there been even the most basic form of professional development, many disasters could have been averted. Lockhart might have been exposed before traumatizing students. Snape might have learned to temper cruelty with compassion. Hagrid might have received support, not scorn. Trelawney might have been gently guided towards self-awareness. Hogwarts has the talent. What it lacks is the infrastructure to support it. In the end, the silence around this issue is deafening. The books, so rich in magical detail, offer nothing on how the educators at Hogwarts are chosen, trained, or evaluated. This gap is more than a narrative hole. It reflects an assumption that genius is enough, when in reality, without the skill to share it, even the most powerful magic is useless. The legacy of Hogwarts rests on its teachers, but who teaches the teachers? That question, to this day, remains unanswered. Number 20, are there regular staff meetings? In the silent corridors of Hogwarts, behind the grandeur of the Great Hall and the echoing footsteps of students, there lies an enigma never fully explored in the books: the internal structure of Hogwarts as an educational institution. One of the most puzzling omissions is the absence of staff meetings. For a school that regularly plays host to trolls, secret chambers, forbidden forests, and uninvited Dark Lords, it is remarkable how rarely we see the teachers collaborating in any official capacity. In any functioning academic institution, meetings are not just expected, they are critical. Yet at Hogwarts there is not a single scene where the faculty gather for a formal discussion of educational matters. Does such a meeting even happen? And if it does, who leads it? Albus Dumbledore with his twinkling eyes, Minerva McGonagall with her rigid efficiency, or perhaps the school owl delivering written notes from tower to tower? The closest we ever come to such a gathering occurs during moments of crisis. In the Philosopher's Stone, when the troll is discovered in the dungeons, Professor McGonagall immediately assumes command, directing students to their dormitories, while Professors Quirrell and Snape vanish into the shadows. Later, we hear that Dumbledore has gone to fetch someone named Nicholas Flamel, but no official emergency meeting takes place to strategize. In The Half-Blood Prince, after the fatal attack on the Astronomy Tower, the staff assembles with urgency, but this again is a reactionary gathering, more a panic-driven emergency council than a structured professional meeting. It raises the question, if Hogwarts were inspected by the Department of Magical Education, would its administrative practices pass even the most basic standards? Curiously, Professor McGonagall is often portrayed as the de facto organizer of order and discipline. She manages class schedules, disciplinary actions, and even inter-house disputes. In the Goblet of Fire, when the Triwizard Tournament is announced, it is McGonagall who expresses concern over student safety and fairness. She informs Harry of his duties as a champion, rather than Dumbledore himself, hinting that she may indeed handle the lion's share of practical logistics. One might imagine that if any formal meetings occur, she would be the one to prepare. The agenda, distribute parchment notices, and ensure attendance, willing or otherwise. But would Severus Snape, with his legendary disdain for most colleagues and students alike, sit through an hour-long meeting discussing whether Filch should get a budget for new shackles? It's difficult to imagine. Snape operates with a sense of superiority and detachment. He is rarely seen collaborating with others unless forced to. In the Order of the Phoenix, when Dolores Umbridge observes his class, he barely conceals his irritation and avoids explanation. His attitude suggests a man who prefers solitary authority over collective discussion. If he does attend meetings, it must be with visible contempt and minimal contribution, perhaps a smirk, a scoff, and an abrupt departure before tea is served. When Dumbledore is in charge, however, the idea of meetings becomes even more nebulous. Dumbledore is a figure of mythic proportions, known for disappearing from the castle without explanation, delegating key responsibilities without clear communication, keeping enormous secrets from both staff and students. In the Chamber of Secrets, when students begin turning up petrified, the staff shows visible concern, but there's no indication that they meet to coordinate responses. Dumbledore appears to act alone, leaving others to make assumptions. This lack of structure may be endearing in a wise old wizard, but seems deeply irresponsible for the head of a school. Still, the faculty clearly communicates in some way. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, when Sirius Black is believed to be entering the castle, professors are suddenly patrolling corridors at night. Someone is organizing these shifts, but is it the result of a formal meeting or whispered instructions passed between portraits and fire calls? There's a sense of informality to everything, as if the school's ancient magic runs so deep that bureaucracy is unnecessary, or perhaps deliberately avoided. It's possible that the enchanted architecture of the castle itself spreads information, removing the need for memos or agendas. Yet the lack of visible coordination results in real failures. In the Order of the Phoenix, when Dumbledore is removed from Hogwarts and Umbridge becomes headmistress, she establishes her own version of faculty meetings, though they resemble more a courtroom than a council. Here, meetings are not forums for collaboration but instruments of control. Umbridge insists on absolute obedience and reduces the other teachers to frightened onlookers. It's a dark satire of what Hogwarts could become if its inner workings were formalized but corrupted. Ironically, her meetings are the most structured ones we see, and they are also the most terrifying. Another moment of interest occurs when Professor Trelawney is sacked. Dumbledore insists she remain at Hogwarts even after Umbridge fires her. Who made this decision? Was there a vote, or did Dumbledore decide unilaterally? Did McGonagall support the move, or Snape, who loathes divination, object? These questions remain unanswered, reinforcing the notion that Hogwarts functions less like a school and more like a medieval court, ruled by charisma and tradition rather than transparent governance. Furthermore, the Sorting Hat, a magical relic with a personality, sings each year about the need for unity among the houses. One might think that this recurring warning would be addressed in staff meetings. Yet we never see any strategic discussions among professors about house rivalry. The antagonism between Slytherin and Gryffindor remains unresolved year after year. Do teachers ever reflect on this, or is it accepted as an unchangeable feature of school life, like Peeves, the poltergeist, or the vanishing cabinet? It is equally odd that we never hear of discussions about curriculum. In the Goblet of Fire, when students learn that defense against the dark arts will be taught by Mad-Eye Moody, who is in fact Barty Crouch Jr., no one seems to have raised concerns about his unconventional methods, like turning students into ferrets or demonstrating unforgivable curses on spiders. If faculty meetings existed, would they not have addressed this? Or is Hogwarts a place where each professor reigns over their subject unchecked, like mini-monarchs with chalk and wand? One particular scene that hints at a meeting, though never shown, occurs in The Philosopher's Stone, when Harry, Ron and Hermione receive 150 points for their bravery. The awarding of points is announced at the end-of-year feast, clearly changing the house standings. Surely such a decision required consultation. Did Dumbledore unilaterally decide this twist, Or did McGonagall and the others discuss and approve it in some backroom chamber, lit by floating candles and groaning over how Gryffindor wins again? Even the hiring process for teachers remains a mystery. Each year, a new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher arrives, often with disastrous consequences. Who interviews these candidates? Does Snape ever sit on the selection panel? And if so, how does he keep a straight face? Are there job descriptions, contracts, probation periods? Given how many of these professors turn out to be evil, cursed, or cursed and evil, one would hope there's at least a background check. But once again, the books remain silent. Perhaps the most telling silence is the one surrounding the fate of certain students. In the Chamber of Secrets, when Dumbledore is temporarily suspended, the school comes dangerously close to being closed. Did the staff meet to discuss contingency plans? Or in The Half-Blood Prince, when Draco Malfoy is clearly acting suspiciously, did anyone bring this up in a meeting? If so, it must have been a very short one, ending with Snape declaring, "I've got it covered," and the rest pretending to believe him. Ultimately, what emerges is a portrait of a school that survives not because of strong administration, but in spite of its absence. Hogwarts endures because of individual loyalty, ancient magic, and narrative necessity, not professional best practices. It's a place where secrets fester in chambered walls, authority is personalized rather than institutional, and staff meetings, if they exist at all, are as mysterious as the Room of Requirement, visible only when absolutely necessary, and never twice the same way. Number 21. What happens to the subject when a teacher dies or leaves? In Harry's third year, Professor Lupin vanished from Hogwarts as quickly as he had arrived. A werewolf revelation, a resignation, and by the time students returned after summer, Defense Against the Dark Arts had a new face again. There was no transition period, no closure, no explanation of whether Lupin had left notes, a lesson plan, or anything to help the next in line. The students simply moved on. But something vital was always missing. The subject never felt continuous. It reset every year like a broken charm refusing to hold. When Professor Quirrell, trembling and possessed, crumbled to dust in the final chamber of Harry's first year, the curriculum vanished with him. The next term, no one referenced his lessons, if they could even be called that. His classes had been filled with stammers and garlic, his teachings shrouded in superstition and fear. After his death, the school made no effort to clarify what the students had learned, or hadn't. The subject moved forward with Gilderoy Lockhart, who promptly undid any academic progress with his vanity and fiction. There was never a sense of academic continuity. Each year, students faced a new teacher, a new method, and in some cases a complete absence of method at all. This academic chaos wasn't limited to Defense Against the Dark Arts, though the curse on the position made it the most glaring example. When Barty Crouch Jr., posing as Mad Eye Moody, taught the fourth years, he introduced concepts far beyond their level. Unforgivable curses, he said, in a tone too calm for the horror he conjured. He broke all pedagogical boundaries, but after his unmasking, Hogwarts never paused to reflect on the damage. There was no debriefing for the students, no remedial lessons, no assurance. Just another September, another professor, and a fresh curriculum with Dolores Umbridge, who would rather deny dark magic existed than teach anyone how to defend against it. It was a pattern of erasure, as though Hogwarts sought to scrub out the past rather than build upon it. Even when professors died, as in the tragic case of Charity Burbage, who taught Muggle studies and was murdered by Voldemort before the 7th year, there was no mourning in the classroom. Her name barely echoed through the stone halls. The subject continued under a Death Eater, Alecto Carrow, whose idea of education was propaganda and torture. Did the school ever attempt to restore Muggle studies after the war? Did anyone return to teach it with respect and truth? Or was it quietly removed from schedules and minds alike? The students bore the consequences. Hermione Granger, always diligent, often had to reteach herself. She once remarked, "This is supposed to be our education, not a joke." A sentiment sparked not by laziness but exhaustion from constant academic instability. The lack of a stable faculty meant that even the brightest minds spent valuable time unlearning mistakes made by previous instructors. Ron Weasley, less academically inclined, simply drifted from one inconsistent lesson to another, accepting confusion as part of the Hogwarts experience. There was never any official word on what happened to lesson plans or class materials when a teacher disappeared. Did the library archive them? Did Dumbledore collect them in his office? Were they passed to the next instructor like a wand, reluctantly accepted and immediately altered? The lack of institutional procedure created an atmosphere where each professor acted in isolation. There was no department collaboration, no consistency in grading or objectives. It was a miracle students learned anything at all. Consider the case of Severus Snape. When he vacated his potions post to teach defense against the dark arts in Harry's 6th year, Horace Slughorn returned after decades of absence. Slughorn's curriculum was lighter, more indulgent, more focused on personal charm than rigorous study. The difference was jarring. Students shifted from Snape's precise, punishing structure to Slughorn's relaxed favoritism. Again, no bridge was built. There was no conversation about how to ease that transition or harmonize the content. Students simply adapted or didn't. And when Snape himself became headmaster in the 7th book, how many subjects were truly taught in any meaningful way? Under Caro's supervision, the lines between education and indoctrination blurred beyond recognition. There were no safety nets, no recovery plan for the curriculum. When the war ended, how did the school pick up those shattered pieces? Were students offered additional years to catch up? Did the staff even know how to proceed? One might expect magical institutions to preserve knowledge with extraordinary precision. Pensieves, enchanted scrolls, talking portraits. These tools exist within reach, and yet Hogwarts operated with a strange resistance to continuity. When a teacher left, the past vanished with them. There were no backup systems, no interdepartmental memos. Even the subjects that should have provided stability, like astronomy or arithmancy, received little attention in the books, possibly because they had no dramatic turnover and thus no drama to discuss. But this only highlights the inconsistency. Why was one subject stable while others were a revolving door? The failure wasn't only logistical, it was emotional. The loss of a professor, especially to violence or scandal, should warrant reflection, but Hogwarts rarely acknowledged these losses beyond the occasional dinner table whisper. There were no assemblies, no healing spaces, no time to digest the implications. When Professor Dumbledore died, his funeral was the exception, not the rule. His portrait in the office became a source of guidance, but no such honor was granted to other lost educators. The institutional memory was weak. Students were left alone to process the void. The impact on magical development cannot be overstated. Defense against the dark arts was a core subject, vital to survival in a dangerous world. Yet it was treated like a disposable elective, passed from hand to hand without care. As Harry once told the DA, "We're going to need to know this stuff whether the Ministry likes it or not." The Ministry might have meddled, but Hogwarts was equally at fault. The subject needed continuity, mentorship, and structured progression. Instead, it received a rotating door of underqualified, cursed, or corrupt figures. There was never a designated deputy to step in. When Lockhart lost his memory, classes didn't continue under a substitute. When Umbridge fled into the forest, her lessons vanished with her. Students learned in secret, in defiance, or not at all. How could a school with centuries of tradition allow such chaos? Where were the protocols? Who reviewed performance? Who ensured knowledge was being passed down? Even a Muggle school had more structure. It's worth noting that Harry, Ron, and Hermione often learned the most outside of class, through the DA, through practical battles, through books and trial. Their education was forged in necessity, not nurtured by curriculum. This speaks to the resilience of the trio, but also to the deep cracks in the Hogwarts system. When a professor disappeared, the school shrugged and hoped for the best. Albus Dumbledore, wise as he was, never offered a solution to this chaos. He hand-picked professors, sometimes with disastrous results, and rarely explained his choices. He trusted in fate or in the ability of young minds to rise above instability. But education is not just inspiration, it is design, method, and structure. Without it, even the brightest falter. Perhaps Dumbledore believed the chaos was part of the learning, but for many students it meant fear, confusion, and lost years. Even Professor McGonagall, with all her sense and discipline, never seemed to create a proper contingency plan. She stepped in for the headmaster, led the school in war, but we never saw her organize replacement faculty or standardize curriculum. The absence of such systems reveals a deep vulnerability. Magic was everywhere, and yet magical governance was curiously absent. By the end of the series, Hogwarts had survived war, death, infiltration, and collapse. But had it learned anything? Did the Board of Governors meet to discuss reforms? Were there reforms? Did they hire mentors for traumatized students? Did they develop a stable teaching core? Or did they once again let fate decide who would teach Defense Against the Dark Arts next year? The unanswered question haunts the legacy of Hogwarts. When a teacher disappears, dies, or betrays, what happens next? The answer seems to be nothing. Students adapt, the castle swallows the past, lessons are forgotten, and the curriculum begins again as if memory were just another vanishing spell. Number 22. Why are there no differentiated courses? At Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the sight of students from every background learning side by side has always been a magical dream in itself. But if one looks closer, beneath the candle-lit grandeur of the Great Hall and the warm, chaotic hum of enchanted classrooms, a troubling pattern emerges. Every student, whether exceptionally gifted or barely capable of producing sparks from their wand, is herded through the same curriculum with little variation. The boy who can cast a perfect levitation charm at 10 is expected to sit through the same class as the boy who can't pronounce Wingardium Leviosa correctly by 15. It is a pedagogical system frozen in time, indifferent to the spectrum of magical talent it claims to nurture. The stark absence of specialized tracks at Hogwarts becomes most glaring when one considers Hermione Granger. Her aptitude for nearly every subject is unquestionable, and her academic hunger insatiable. By her second year, she had already brewed Polyjuice Potion, a task so advanced it was not intended for any student below Newty level. Yet despite her brilliance, Hermione was bound by the same lesson plans, the same pacing, and the same assessments as students who could barely remember the incantation for Lumos. The educational model did not reward her initiative. It restrained it. Hogwarts forced her to slow down for the sake of conformity, even as she yearned to do more. Consider Neville Longbottom. His slow start in most magical disciplines wasn't due to a lack of potential, as later events would show, but perhaps to a lack of appropriate guidance. He struggled with basic spells, trembling under the weight of family expectations and the laughter of classmates. Yet Hogwarts offered him no corrective tutoring, no modified path. There was no small group instruction, no targeted curriculum to help him unlock his unique talent for herbology or gain confidence in his weaker areas. In fact, his transformation didn't occur under the guidance of any school system at all. It was necessity and trauma, not structured learning, that forged the brave warrior who destroyed the final Horcrux. The system at Hogwarts assumes magical ability is uniform, predictable, and equally accessible to all students, but the narrative itself disproves this repeatedly. Luna Lovegood, though eccentric, had a distinctly intuitive connection to magic and a mind made for creative thought. Her understanding of creatures like Thestrals came not from textbooks, but from experience and emotion. Meanwhile, others required rote memorization and endless drills to pass their owls. The school, however, treated them all as interchangeable wizards to be fed the same spells at the same time with the same results expected. The magical world celebrates diversity in bloodlines, creatures, and traditions. But when it comes to education, it clings to a one-size-fits-all structure that stifles both the gifted and the struggling. The spellwork curriculum, for instance, never evolved to reflect individual strengths. Fred and George Weasley had a natural flair for charms and inventions, demonstrated by their masterful joke products and creative use of spells. Yet they were constantly reprimanded for stepping outside academic bounds. Rather than channeling their innovation into an advanced track of magical engineering or experimental charms, the system punished them for refusing to color inside the lines. Ironically, they would later become highly successful entrepreneurs, no thanks to Hogwarts. Advanced students never receive official differentiation. There are no honors classes, no advanced placement programs, no mentorships or apprenticeships, only the hope that individual professors might occasionally offer extra credit or limited encouragement. Professor McGonagall did offer Hermione the chance to take more subjects with the help of a time turner, but this was an exception so extreme it bent time itself. That an entire institution had no formal way of nurturing a student's gifts without relying on magical loopholes speaks volumes about its rigidity. It would be one thing if the school merely neglected to support prodigies, but it also fails those who fall behind. Ron Weasley, though brave and loyal, often struggled academically. He needed structure, support, and perhaps a slower pace for theory-based subjects like potions. But instead of adapting the material, Hogwarts offered him embarrassment when he failed, and detention when he fell short. Students who didn't thrive in the default system were quietly labelled lazy or inattentive. The idea that magical learning could be differentiated based on learning styles or developmental readiness never entered the conversation. Even Harry Potter himself, for all his fame, spent much of his early magical education reacting rather than mastering. His signature spells, Expelliarmus, the Patronus charm, were not taught in classes at all, but rather acquired through necessity and private instruction. The very spell that saved him from Dementors wasn't something Professor Flitwick had ever prepared him to learn. Instead, it was Professor Lupin, outside the classroom system, who tailored a lesson to Harry's needs. In that moment, Harry thrived. It is tragic that such customized education only happened under the most dire circumstances. The lack of a tailored curriculum also has darker implications. In a world where blood status, family wealth, and political allegiance influence so much, the fact that magical education is not adapted to serve each child's needs only deepens social divides. Draco Malfoy, born into wealth and tutored at home before arriving at Hogwarts, had a significant head start. His skills in potions and dueling weren't just natural, they were nurtured early. Meanwhile, students from Muggle families arrived with zero exposure to even the basics of the magical world. To throw them all into the same academic ocean without life vests is not equality, it is negligence. If the Ministry of Magic truly valued education, one might expect some system of academic support. But instead, magical education is treated more like tradition than a dynamic field of growth. Professor Binns, the ghostly history of magic teacher, drones on with the same lectures he delivered in life. The idea of using engaging materials, multiple learning methods, or, heaven forbid, individualized instruction is as foreign to him as the Battle of Hogwarts. The classroom is a relic, and the minds within it are offered no lifeline beyond their own perseverance. There is also the glaring issue of non-academic talents. Students with practical gifts, like Hagrid's love for magical creatures or Dean Thomas's artistic eye, find no formal channel for development. If your skill isn't listed among the core subjects, transfiguration, charms, potions, defense against the dark arts, herbology, then you are invisible to the curriculum. Creativity, empathy, leadership, and intuition have no classroom, no grade, and no champion at Hogwarts. And that is a devastating omission in a world where magic responds to intention as much as incantation. What could Hogwarts look like if it embraced diversity of ability? Imagine small groups where struggling students could work with tutors. Imagine Hermione leading workshops in arithmancy, while Seamus got extra help mastering controlled explosions. Imagine Luna teaching her peers about magical theory through unconventional thought experiments, while Fred and George ran a creativity lab under Professor Flitwick's guidance. Hogwarts has the resources. What it lacks is the will to evolve. The castle, full of moving staircases and sentient paintings, is not short on magic. But when it comes to educating young witches and wizards, the system remains stunningly rigid. Every year the same classes are taught in the same way by the same teachers with little room for improvisation. The result is an experience that punishes the curious, neglects the struggling, and holds back the exceptional. Magic is supposed to be limitless, yet Hogwarts chains it with outdated rules and static expectations. Even during dire times like the rise of Voldemort or the Carrow's dark reign, the educational structure remained unchanged. There were no new support systems, no academic contingencies, no recognition that learning styles must shift when trauma enters the classroom. The students were expected to either endure or break. That so many of them chose resistance is a testament not to Hogwarts' teachings, but to their own strength. In Order of the Phoenix, Dolores Umbridge's refusal to allow practical defense against the dark arts classes is met with outrage. But her biggest crime wasn't just withholding knowledge, it was enforcing a rigid structure where none was needed. The formation of Dumbledore's army was not just rebellion, it was educational self-defense. Students created their own structure, adapted to their level, and supported one another. Ironically, it was the only time Hogwarts ever hosted a differentiated curriculum, and it was completely unauthorized. The wizarding world may pride itself on legacy, but legacy without evolution is stagnation. If Hogwarts is truly to be the beacon of magical education, it must rise beyond tradition and embrace transformation. Until it does, every brilliant Hermione, struggling Neville, or curious Luna will continue to learn despite the system, not because of it. Number 23. Who manages staff conflicts? In the hallowed halls of Hogwarts, where ancient portraits whisper forgotten secrets and suits of armor groan with unseen burdens, one silent question lingers in the stone-cold corridors. Who watches the Watchers? The castle's magic is strong, but magic alone cannot resolve human conflict. And Hogwarts, for all its grandeur, remains a place of complex relationships, not only among students, but especially among its staff. These professors live together, dine together, and work together for decades. They are bound by shared walls and a sense of duty, but nothing about their shared tenure guarantees harmony. One must wonder, in the absence of any visible system of checks and balances, who ensures that the moral climate among the teachers remains stable and just. The headmaster, of course, sits at the apex of Hogwarts' hierarchy, and in Dumbledore's time, his wisdom often acted as the last word in disputes. But even Dumbledore, brilliant and far-sighted as he was, had his blind spots. He trusted people deeply, sometimes to a fault. The most glaring example, Severus Snape. Despite years of visible animosity towards students like Neville Longbottom, "Why is it always me?" Neville once muttered in class, and his deeply personal hatred for Harry, Snape was allowed to continue his behavior without consequence. No committee reviewed his methods, no supervisor corrected his cruelty. In any other institution, Snape's conduct might have warranted hearings or interventions. At Hogwarts, it simply continued. Consider the moment when Professor Trelawney, trembling and dishevelled, was dismissed by Umbridge in Order of the Phoenix. The spectacle unfolded in full view of the students, a humiliation broadcast without concern for dignity. Where was the faculty voice in her defence? Only Dumbledore intervened, and even he admitted his hands were tied by ministry decree. The rest of the staff watched in silence. The scene reveals how fragile a teacher's position can be, and how dependent it is on the goodwill of a single superior, rather than any structured review board. When Dumbledore's authority waned, so too did the protections for his staff. Conflict among the professors is never directly discussed in the books, but the tension is palpable. Professor McGonagall and Professor Umbridge's constant sparring in the fifth book is one example, but even more quietly compelling is the clash of philosophies between Flitwick and Snape. Flitwick, the gentle charms master with a fondness for creativity and emotional expression, would likely regard music, as Dumbledore does, as a magic beyond all we do here. Snape, ever the stoic and analytical potions master, seems to disdain anything remotely frivolous. Their subjects embody opposite ends of magical pedagogy. One, light and expressive, the other dark and calculated. No scenes directly depict arguments between them, but imagine the staff room, a place briefly glimpsed in Goblet of Fire, when such worldviews inevitably collide. Who mediates when these differing ideologies clash over curriculum or school policy? Hogwarts lacks something astonishingly fundamental, an ethical body or governing board independent of the headmaster. There is no staff council, no peer-reviewed process for handling grievances. Any complaint would likely have to go directly to the headmaster himself. But what if the headmaster is involved in the dispute or unwilling to act? Even in Half-Blood Prince, when Harry presents Dumbledore with disturbing memories about Draco Malfoy and the cursed necklace, the solution is always private, never procedural. The idea of transparency is non-existent in Hogwarts' system of governance. This is not a democracy, it is a benevolent autocracy, and that becomes a dangerous precedent when the leader falters. Even the dueling club, which might seem like a light-hearted extracurricular, reveals something about Hogwarts' approach to conflict resolution. Introduced in Chamber of Secrets, the club was meant to prepare students to defend themselves, but the lesson quickly devolves into chaos under the supervision of Gilderoy Lockhart and Severus Snape, the latter clearly using the event to showcase his power over students. When Snape disarms Lockhart with effortless disdain, it's not just instruction, it's spectacle. The club dissolves not because of any formal review or concern for student safety, but simply because its organizers lose interest. No faculty oversight, no ethical committee intervenes to ask if perhaps Lockhart was a dangerous fraud, or if Snape's motives were more personal than pedagogical. The staff's internal dynamics seem driven less by institutional policy and more by personal loyalty, grudges, and silent hierarchies. Professor Sprout, head of Hufflepuff House and expert in herbology, is rarely shown asserting herself in broader school affairs. Her quiet presence is a reminder that not every teacher has equal influence. It is McGonagall, Snape, and Dumbledore who dominate faculty decisions. The rest remain in the shadows, their opinions either unheard or unvalued. Even when Professor Hagrid is nearly fired for alleged mismanagement of magical creatures, the process lacks any formal trial or review. His fate is determined by ministry interference and Dumbledore's ability to vouch for him, not through any objective internal process. The absence of standardized conflict resolution mechanisms becomes especially troubling when one considers the diversity of backgrounds among Hogwarts staff. Take Firenze the Centaur, who was invited to teach divination after Trelawney's dismissal. His presence alone caused unrest among other centaurs who viewed his decision as betrayal. But within Hogwarts, how did the staff react? Was there unease about hiring someone so philosophically different? Was he accepted as a peer, or merely tolerated? The books don't say, but one imagines the staff room again, Firenze sitting in a corner, silent and foreign, while the humans around him discuss mundane matters. Integration without institutional support is isolation by another name. In the later books, particularly during Umbridge's regime, we see the consequences of unchecked authority. Teachers are not just discouraged from resistance, they are threatened with dismissal, surveillance, and public shame. McGonagall nearly loses her job for defending her students. The absence of a collective voice, a union even, means each teacher must stand alone. They are powerful wizards, yes, but politically powerless in the face of systemic oppression. The very magic that empowers them cannot protect them from institutional rot. Snape's tenure as headmaster in Deathly Hallows further illustrates this point. His appointment is not meritocratic, nor is it reviewed by peers. It is a decree from Voldemort's puppet government. Under his rule, Alecto and Amicus Caro introduced torturous punishments and twisted curricula. Other staff members are helpless or forced into passive resistance. No formal mechanisms exist for recall, protest, or reform. Hogwarts becomes a dystopia not through magical transformation, but through bureaucratic silence. The books provide hints that even Dumbledore was aware of these structural flaws. His cryptic comment in Philosopher's Stone, "It takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies, but just as much to stand up to our friends," may have been aimed as much at his staff as his students. He valued moral courage, but he left few tools to practice it safely. The absence of ethical infrastructure in Hogwarts did not reflect an oversight. It may have reflected an assumption that magic, tradition, and good intentions would suffice. But history teaches otherwise. Even Hogwarts ghosts hint at internal conflict. The Grey Lady's tale in Deathly Hallows reveals years of unspoken pain, betrayal, and jealousy. If the dead carry unresolved grudges, why should we assume the living don't? Professors like Slughorn, with his clear preference for talented or well-connected students, perpetuate a culture of favoritism. Again, no policy addresses this. No one questions why some students are invited to the Slug Club while others are ignored. The favoritism is institutional, not incidental. So who guards the Guardians? The uncomfortable answer is no one. Hogwarts functions on a fragile web of personal integrity, charisma, and ancient tradition. It survives not because of strong systems, but in spite of their absence. And while the magic of the place is undeniable, one wonders what darkness hides behind the staff room doors, where wands are put away, but old resentments remain very much alive. Number 24. Who designs the curriculum? In the shadowed corners of Hogwarts' ancient stone halls, a quiet mystery lingers, never quite addressed, even across 7 years of Harry's turbulent education. It's not a riddle wrapped in a prophecy or the secret of a hidden Horcrux. It is something far more ordinary and perhaps far more important. Who decides what young witches and wizards are taught within these walls? The question may seem mundane, yet it echoes with unsettling implications when one realizes how oddly selective, even outdated, the curriculum truly is. Why is divination a standard subject, while magical ethics or even self-defense against mind control are left to luck and circumstance? When Harry first steps into Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration classroom, he is immediately thrust into a world of complex magic, changing a matchstick into a needle. Transfiguration is a foundational subject, drilled into students from their first year. But who determined its place at the heart of magical education? McGonagall, as deputy headmistress and head of Gryffindor, certainly holds influence. Yet even she often speaks of rules and structure that are simply the way things are. No moment in the series suggests she or even Dumbledore authored the curriculum. The mystery deepens. In Order of the Phoenix, during the brutal reign of Dolores Umbridge, we finally glimpse interference from the Ministry of Magic in Hogwarts affairs. Educational decrees are handed down, some dictating teaching methods, others expelling professors. But before Umbridge, and after her removal, no such interference is mentioned. Does this mean the ministry typically plays no part in curriculum design, or is their influence more subtle, embedded through tradition rather than regulation? The Educational Decree number 24 makes Umbridge the High Inquisitor, but her very need to create decrees implies that before her, Hogwarts operated with unchallenged autonomy. Consider Professor Trelawney's subject, divination. She is portrayed as eccentric, her lessons bordering on absurd. Even Dumbledore himself confesses in Prisoner of Azkaban that he hired her mainly because she once uttered a prophecy. Yet this does not explain why divination was a long-standing part of the curriculum. Hogwarts is supposed to prepare students for the magical world, yet they waste years deciphering tea leaves and crystal balls, skills that even Professor McGonagall calls a very imprecise branch of magic. If the most senior staff ridicule the subject, why is it mandatory at all? The problem is not only what is taught, but also what isn't. Nowhere in 7 years does Harry or his classmates study magical law, a critical oversight considering how deeply law governs wizarding society. Harry repeatedly stumbles into legal danger, from using a Patronus in Order of the Phoenix to possession of the Marauder's map, which could be considered dark magic. Yet no subject prepares students to understand their rights or obligations as magical citizens. One would imagine the Department of Magical Law Enforcement might have an interest in young wizards knowing the rules before breaking them. Then there is the matter of financial literacy. Goblins control the Wizarding Bank, Gringotts, and Wizarding Society clearly operates on a monetary system. Yet no class at Hogwarts covers budgeting, inheritance, or economic ethics. Fred and George Weasley, brilliant inventors with poor grades, somehow bootstrap a business from joke products. But did they learn this ingenuity at Hogwarts, or despite it? The twins drop out in their 7th year, arguably at the peak of their entrepreneurial growth. Their success is a fluke, not the result of educational preparation. In fact, no professor seems interested in developing magical entrepreneurship at all. One cannot ignore the glaring absence of mental defense training. In Goblet of Fire, Harry is nearly possessed by Voldemort. In Order of the Phoenix, he suffers visions and feelings not his own. Only then does Snape begin teaching him occlumency, a subject so rare and advanced that most wizards have never even heard of it. Yet wouldn't it be logical to teach at least the basics of occlumency from the early years? Given the existence of legilimency, a mind-reading form of magic used by both Voldemort and Dumbledore, why is mental privacy not treated as sacred and teachable? Hogwarts has no formal defense against emotional or psychological manipulation until it's too late. Even within the existing subjects, inconsistency reigns. Take defense against the dark arts, a class so vital it's taught every year, yet suffers from constant turnover. Quirrell, Lockhart, Lupin, Moody, or rather Barty Crouch Jr., Umbridge, and finally Snape. 6 teachers in as many years. Each brings their own methods, content, and weaknesses. Lupin, perhaps the most competent, teaches practical spells like the Patronus, which Harry uses for the rest of the series, but others, like Lockhart, focus on showmanship and useless theory. Is there no standard syllabus, no defined skills checklist? Who ensures students graduate with the same core knowledge if each year is a roulette? The sequence of learning is also questionable. Why do students study history of magic, a class taught by a ghost who recites facts with no analysis, before learning anything about magical lore or current events? Why are care and handling of magical creatures introduced before students master protective enchantments? Hagrid's lessons often place students in dangerous situations involving hippogriffs or blast-ended scroots. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Draco is injured after mocking Buckbeak, an event that sparks a major legal case. Had Draco taken a course in magical etiquette or safety, this might have been avoided. The tradition-bound nature of Hogwarts is undeniable. Its very architecture resists change, moving staircases, talking portraits, and a ceiling enchanted to reflect the sky. Yet should pedagogy cling to that same rigidity? Even when confronted with Voldemort's rise, the school remains structurally the same. No new security courses. No emergency lessons on magical survival. Dumbledore is wise, yet he never modernizes the curriculum. Perhaps he believes magic should be learned through experience. But isn't that what got Cedric Diggory killed? Students are sorted into houses on their first day, an irreversible label that defines much of their Hogwarts identity. Yet no coursework addresses inter-house relations or collaborative learning. In fact, classes often reinforce division, Gryffindor versus Slytherin in potions, Hufflepuff versus Ravenclaw in flying lessons. Without structured opportunities to learn cooperation across houses, prejudice festers. Snape openly favours Slytherins. McGonagall defends Gryffindors. This tribalism spills into adult wizarding life, where former house rivalries become political enmities. How can a school that fails to teach empathy claim to prepare students for a divided world? The sorting hat itself recognizes this flaw. In Order of the Phoenix, it sings, "Though condemned I am to split you, still I worry that it's wrong." The hat, a sentient relic of Hogwarts founders, knows the dangers of rigidity, yet it is compelled by ancient magic to continue sorting. Likewise, Hogwarts itself seems compelled to follow archaic teaching patterns. Professor Binns, for instance, died in his sleep and simply continued teaching. No one replaced him. No one questioned whether students were actually learning anything. Tradition, it seems, trumps effectiveness. Even the final exams are puzzling. In Philosopher's Stone, students sit for tests that involve turning animals into goblets and concocting potions under pressure. But the real challenges of the wizarding world involve ethical decisions, moral nuance, and survival. Hermione Granger, the brightest student of her year, panics during emotional crises. Her education prepared her for standardized spells, not the messy, unpredictable nature of human conflict. In Deathly Hallows, Harry, Ron and Hermione live on the run, surviving on quick thinking and moral resolve, not anything they learned in a classroom. And yet, for all these questions, no governing body is ever clearly named. Not the Board of Governors, not the Ministry of Education, if such a thing even exists in the magical world. The only known moment of curricular adjustment occurs under Umbridge, whose decrees are met with rebellion and derision. Her failure does not validate the old system, only highlights how unaccountable it is. Dumbledore, beloved as he is, acts more like a philosophical guide than an educational administrator. No meetings are shown where staff vote on lesson plans. No reforms are discussed even after a war breaks out. The Hogwarts curriculum, it seems, is a patchwork of inherited traditions, personal biases, and the ghost of decisions made centuries ago. The four founders, Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin, each favoured different qualities. But did they also dictate the subjects forevermore? Was the original school built around their personal skills, bravery, loyalty, intellect, ambition? And thus the classes reflect their worldview. Perhaps Transfiguration reflects Ravenclaw's love of precision, while Care of Magical Creatures nods to Hufflepuff's compassion. Yet if the curriculum is a fossilized echo of their values, then Hogwarts is not a school at all, but a monument. And a monument is not a place of growth. It is a place of remembrance. Perhaps that is why so much of Harry's education takes place outside the classroom, in secret meetings, in whispered guidance from mentors, in hard-won lessons bought with pain. The real question is not what Hogwarts teaches, but what it refuses to teach, and whether that silence is by design. Number 25. Are there lessons about the Muggle world? Of all the unanswered questions in the Harry Potter universe, one stands out as quietly unsettling. Why does Hogwarts, a prestigious institution meant to prepare young witches and wizards for life, completely ignore the world of Muggles beyond its walls? This isn't merely an academic curiosity. After all, the wizarding world does not exist in a vacuum. From Diagon Alley to the Ministry of Magic, magical life intersects constantly with the non-magical. Yet Hogwarts, with its centuries-old stone walls and enchanted ceilings, seems to behave as if Muggles are little more than a distant rumour. Nowhere is this more troubling than in the absence of any structured education on how to live in or even understand the Muggle world. Take Arthur Weasley as a prime example, a high-ranking ministry employee, head of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office, and a man utterly fascinated by non-magical inventions. Despite his seniority and deep interest, Arthur's knowledge of Muggle technology is embarrassingly lacking. He refers to telephones as fellitones and is unsure of the function of a rubber duck. This isn't played for tragedy, of course, it's comic relief. But dig a little deeper and the laughter curdles. If someone as experienced and well-meaning as Arthur Weasley can't grasp even the basics of Muggle culture, what does that say about the rest of the wizarding population? And more importantly, what does that say about their education? Hermione Granger, a Muggle-born witch raised entirely outside the magical world, is often the sole bridge between the two cultures at Hogwarts. She corrects Ron's misconceptions, she explains how trains and libraries work, and she seems to be the only student who actually understands that there's more to life than wizard chess and self-stirring cauldrons. Yet despite her insights, there is no indication that Hermione's unique position inspires Hogwarts to incorporate any Muggle studies into the core curriculum. In fact, when she takes Muggle studies in her third year, she drops it soon after time-turner fatigue kicks in, another subtle signal that the subject is seen as optional, soft, and unworthy of academic seriousness. There's something insidious in that. According to Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the Triwizard Tournament is designed to test courage, magical skill, and ingenuity. But none of its tasks require understanding or dealing with the Muggle world, even though the tournament is broadcast through the Daily Prophet, read by both magical and half-blood families alike. Why are witches and wizards tested on dragons and mermaids, but never on how to blend into or protect themselves within a Muggle environment? It's not just an oversight, it's systemic negligence. Consider the case of Remus Lupin, arguably the most well-rounded and beloved defense against the dark arts teacher in the series. He teaches practical spells, focuses on real-world threats, and shows a rare compassion for all students, including Neville Longbottom. Yet even he never mentions the dangers that can come from interacting poorly with Muggle institutions. There are no lessons on what to do if you're caught performing magic by accident in front of Muggles, no advice on how to use a Muggle passport, open a bank account, or explain away magical scars. For students like Seamus Finnegan, who come from mixed magical and non-magical homes, this silence is not just puzzling, it's a gaping void in their preparedness. The wizarding world interacts with the Muggle world far more often than Hogwarts cares to admit. The entrance to the Ministry of Magic is located in a Muggle street, requiring knowledge of telephone booths. The Hogwarts Express departs from King's Cross, a Muggle train station. Wizards like Tonks and Kingsley Shacklebolt go undercover in Muggle jobs to protect and monitor non-magical society. Yet nowhere do we see that these roles are supported by educational training. It seems that those who succeed in the Muggle world do so either because they were born into it, like Hermione, or because they fumble their way through with curiosity and guesswork, like Arthur Weasley. And then there's the issue of law. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry is nearly expelled from Hogwarts for using the Patronus charm in front of Dudley and a Muggle neighbourhood. He must stand trial at the Ministry of Magic to explain his actions. The trial is a mockery of justice, of course, but it raises a much larger concern. Harry, a minor, used a life-saving spell under duress, but never once had he been taught the full consequences of using magic in the presence of Muggles. It's expected that children somehow absorb this knowledge by osmosis or family tradition. What happens to students who don't have magical guardians? What of the other Muggle-borns, less assertive than Hermione? Who teaches them the rules? The answer seems to be no one. Hogwarts relies on a flawed assumption that wizard-born children will learn from their parents, and Muggle-borns will catch up quickly. But this sets up an inherent inequality in magical education. Those from pure-blood families glide through the system, while others stumble blindly, hoping not to get arrested for accidental violations of the Statute of Secrecy. If this sounds like an educational crisis, it is. And it has very real consequences even in the books. When the Death Eaters take over the Ministry in Deathly Hallows, one of their first targets is Muggle-borns. Their supposed lack of magical heritage becomes a weaponized excuse to persecute them. In this context, knowledge of the Muggle world could have been life-saving. But again, Hogwarts is silent. Even the subject of Muggle studies itself is treated like a footnote. According to Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, the class is taught by a ghost-like figure in the background, Professor Burbage, who is later murdered in Deathly Hallows for defending Muggles. Her death is a horrifying event witnessed by Harry in visions from Voldemort's mind. Yet even this tragedy doesn't inspire reform. No one at Hogwarts suggests revamping her curriculum or integrating her ideas into broader magical education. It's as if her work and her death didn't matter. The lack of training in Muggle matters has another unintended effect. It fuels prejudice. Ron Weasley's casual dismissal of Muggles isn't born of cruelty, but ignorance. He doesn't know how they live, what they value, or how complex their world can be. He asks Hermione if electricity is a kind of magic. This kind of thinking isn't harmless. It sets the stage for dangerous ideologies like those of Voldemort and the Death Eaters. When young minds aren't given tools to understand, they begin to judge. They fear what they don't know. Hogwarts, by turning a blind eye to Muggle education, becomes complicit in that fear. Some may argue that the Statute of Secrecy requires wizards to keep their distance. But secrecy does not mean ignorance. In fact, understanding Muggles would make it easier to coexist without suspicion. The best way to preserve magical identity is not through isolation, but through education. A witch who understands how Muggle hospitals work won't accidentally use magic in a crisis. A wizard who knows Muggle law is less likely to arouse suspicion with a poorly worded alibi. Knowledge builds walls of protection far sturdier than spells alone. Let's not forget that magical children before Hogwarts live in the Muggle world for years. They walk Muggle streets, eat Muggle food, and sometimes attend Muggle schools. Then at age 11, they are whisked into a bubble of magical tradition where everything Muggle is treated as irrelevant or comedic. This rupture is more damaging than it appears. Students like Dean Thomas and Hermione Granger are forced to split their identities, suppressing what they knew before magic, because there's no place for it at Hogwarts. It's assimilation by omission. Even after graduation, the problem persists. Auras, unspeakables, and ministry officials are regularly assigned missions that require discretion in Muggle environments. But nowhere is it implied that they were trained for such delicate tasks. This lack of preparation could jeopardize lives, compromise operations, or worse, lead to diplomatic disaster. In a world where magic must be kept secret, ignorance becomes a liability. The irony is painful. The magical community fears exposure, yet trains its members to be completely unprepared for the very world they must hide from. There is no single villain here, only centuries of tradition calcified into neglect. Dumbledore, for all his wisdom, never spoke publicly about the importance of Muggle integration. Professor McGonagall, as headmistress, shows no sign of modernizing the syllabus. It is a curious blindness from those who claim to care about the future of magical youth. Perhaps they fear that exposure to Muggles dilutes magical identity, or perhaps they simply don't know what they don't know. In the end, Hogwarts remains a place of wonder and beauty, but also of profound blind spots. Its students learn to brew potions, tame hippogriffs, and conjure light from a wand tip, but they do not learn how to fill out a Muggle job application or navigate a subway map. They know how to duel, but not how to defuse a conversation with a police officer. This is not just a curriculum gap, it is a dangerous failure to prepare young witches and wizards for the real world. Magic may be powerful, but understanding is essential. Without it, even the brightest spell is cast in darkness. Number 26, who disciplines the teachers. At Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the rules are clear for students. Step out of line and punishment follows, whether it be detention, the loss of house points, or in rare cases, expulsion. The boundaries for student behavior are well established, monitored by prefects and enforced by professors. But the same cannot be said for the educators themselves. When a professor chooses to abuse power, cross lines, or show blatant favoritism, there appears to be no process of accountability. This unsettling truth becomes most obvious through the figure of Severus Snape, a professor whose conduct raises disturbing questions about the governance of Hogwarts. Snape, the potions master, for most of the series, openly insults students, humiliates them in class, and allows his personal biases to cloud his professional responsibilities. When Neville Longbottom's greatest fear is revealed to be Snape himself, that should signal something terribly wrong. A child who fears a teacher more than anything else in the world is a child who is being harmed. And yet, no action is taken. Dumbledore, who sees all and knows all, remains silent. The staff room, where one might expect peers to hold each other accountable, is an echo chamber of polite denial. One need only recall Snape's treatment of Hermione Granger to feel the weight of this injustice. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, he cruelly mocks her intelligence in front of the class, telling her, "You insufferable know-it-all," after she answers a question correctly. Ron Weasley defends her, saying, "You asked us a question and she knows the answer. Why ask if you don't want to be told?" This is not just a moment of rudeness, it's the abuse of authority. A professor belittling a 13-year-old girl for being smart is an act that would merit serious consequences in any decent academic institution, but not at Hogwarts. And Snape is far from alone. Sybil Trelawney, the divination professor, consistently misleads students with fear-mongering predictions and vague warnings. She tells Lavender Brown that the thing you're dreading will happen on the 16th of October, and when Lavender receives news of her rabbit's death, Trelawney takes it as proof of her foresight. This is not harmless eccentricity, it's the emotional manipulation of young minds. Yet no inquiry follows, and she is allowed to continue teaching, her methods unchecked, and her qualifications questioned only in whispers. Even Minerva McGonagall, one of the most disciplined and respected teachers, shows bias in favor of Gryffindor. While she often stands up to Snape's partiality, she also turns a blind eye to misconduct when it suits her. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, she gives Harry, Ron, Neville, and Hermione 150 points in a single evening, pushing Gryffindor to win the House Cup. The act may feel heroic in the moment, but it reflects a profound flaw in the system. Who oversees such point allocations? Who ensures they are fair? Apparently, no one. Then there is Dolores Umbridge, whose entire tenure at Hogwarts is a grotesque display of unaccountable power. Her methods are not just strict, they are abusive. Forcing Harry to write lines with a quill that carves words into his flesh is torture by any standard. "I must not tell lies," she says calmly, as he bleeds into the parchment. This is a crime, and yet she faces no legal consequences. No board of governors investigates her behavior. In fact, the ministry supports her. At Hogwarts, the teacher is God, and the student is left helpless. The lack of oversight allows personal vendettas to flourish unchecked. Snape's grudge against Harry for resembling his father results in years of emotional abuse. His hatred blinds him to any attempt at fairness, even when Harry excels. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Harry excels in potions under the guidance of Professor Slughorn, proving he had potential all along. But Snape never encouraged this. Instead, he ridiculed Harry's efforts and sabotaged his confidence. This isn't teaching, it's vengeance, wrapped in the cloak of education. No evidence suggests that Hogwarts has a disciplinary board or even a basic peer review process among professors. There is no mention of complaints being filed or grievances being heard. When Dumbledore dies and Snape becomes headmaster, it becomes clearer than ever that positions of power are handed out without any transparent criteria. A man who spent years harassing students is now in charge of the entire school. The message is chilling. Authority protects its own. The problem seems embedded in the culture of Hogwarts itself. Much like the aristocracies of old, the staff operate in a world of privilege and immunity. Their word is law, and their actions go unquestioned. Students can be expelled for rule-breaking, but professors can destroy a child's self-worth with impunity. The imbalance is jarring. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry tries to report Umbridge's torture methods, his voice is silenced. No one listens, no one investigates. Justice does not extend upward. Remus Lupin, by contrast, stands out as a rare example of ethical teaching. He encourages students, adapts to their needs, and treats them with respect. Under his guidance, even Neville begins to gain confidence. Lupin shows what Hogwarts could be, an institution that nurtures rather than intimidates. but Lupin's presence is short-lived, not because of misconduct, but because of public prejudice against werewolves. Ironically, he is driven out not by any fault in his teaching, but by fear and stigma. Meanwhile, the true abusers remain untouched. Even Hagrid, beloved and kind-hearted, is placed in a teaching position with little training or oversight. His lessons are well-meaning but dangerous. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Buckbeak attacks Draco Malfoy, and although Draco provokes the creature, it becomes clear that Hagrid's lack of structured instruction plays a role. A better system would have trained him, guided him, or paired him with a co-teacher. But Hogwarts prefers spontaneity over structure, passion over preparedness. Students pay the price. The school's leadership, primarily the headmaster, holds ultimate power but rarely intervenes in the day-to-day behavior of the staff. Dumbledore, revered and wise, chooses trust over scrutiny. But this trust is often misplaced. His hands-off approach allows injustice to fester. He defends Snape's role for years, claiming it's for the greater good, but never confronts the damage Snape inflicts daily. One wonders how many students suffered quietly while the headmaster looked the other way. There is no record of annual evaluations, no sign of student feedback being considered. Teaching styles range from the absurd to the militaristic, and students are expected to adapt. The school lacks basic protections one would expect in any educational environment. No counselor exists to hear a child's concerns. No office exists to investigate faculty misconduct. Hogwarts, for all its magic, is trapped in a feudal model of governance. Even Professor Binns, a literal ghost, continues teaching long after his death. His lectures are so dull that students struggle to stay awake. Why does no one replace him? Why is there no performance review that questions whether a ghost is the best choice for educating the young? The system is not designed to improve or evolve. It is designed to preserve tradition, even at the expense of student well-being. These examples, drawn from years at Hogwarts, paint a troubling picture. The school functions more like a medieval court than a modern institution. Its professors are monarchs of their classrooms, their power unchecked, their decisions unchallenged. The hierarchy is rigid, and dissent is rare. When students rebel, as Harry does, they are labelled troublemakers. When professors abuse, they are protected by silence. The question remains, who holds Hogwarts teachers accountable? The answer, sadly, seems to be no one. And until that changes, the school will continue to breed both excellence and quiet trauma, magic and harm, brilliance and fear, all under the same enchanted roof. Number 27. Why are there so few professors? At first glance, Hogwarts seems like the most magical place in the world. Towering spires, floating candles, and endless corridors whisper secrets of a bygone era. But behind the charm lies a question that continues to gnaw at attentive readers. How does a school hosting hundreds of students operate with barely more than a dozen teachers? The sprawling castle is filled with young witches and wizards, yet the staffing feels suspiciously minimal. Professor McGonagall teaches Transfiguration, serves as deputy headmistress, oversees Gryffindor House, and frequently handles disciplinary actions. How does one person juggle all of that without collapsing from exhaustion? Professor Snape, similarly, is both potions master and head of Slytherin House, regularly patrolling corridors and personally handling detentions. When he teaches Harry's class, he must also be teaching 6th or 7th years at other hours, not to mention managing potion supplies for the entire school. There is no indication of teaching assistants or lab managers helping him, no mention of anyone grading assignments for him either. The question is not just about how, but why the magical world seems content with such logistical absurdity. If magic solves everything, then where are the magical solutions? The students of Hogwarts span 7 years, from 11 to 17, and each house contains scores of children. That would mean hundreds of lessons every week across all subjects: charms, herbology, potions, defense against the dark arts, transfiguration, astronomy, history of magic, and more. Yet each subject is led by a single professor. For instance, Professor Flitwick teaches charms and is often described as cheerful and sprightly, but there is never any mention of him having assistants, magical or otherwise, to help coordinate his schedule or classroom needs. Does he simply teleport from class to class with miraculous timing? If so, does magic entirely negate the concept of educational infrastructure? Even physical education appears to be absent, save for flying lessons in the first year, taught solely by Madam Hooch. After that, sports training seems to vanish into the realm of Quidditch, which is entirely organised by the students themselves. Oliver Wood trains the Gryffindor team without any adult supervision, and when he schedules early morning or late-night practices, there's no sign of safety protocols or staff involvement. If Madam Hooch is responsible for all flying-related activities, is she also responsible for the upkeep of brooms, the training of referees, and disciplinary measures when students use their brooms irresponsibly? It's as if Hogwarts runs on the fumes of self-governance and chaos. The question deepens when considering non-academic needs. In a modern boarding school, one would expect school counsellors, dorm supervisors, and health educators. Hogwarts offers a single nurse, Madame Pomfrey, who tends to every injury from broken arms to full-body petrifications. When students are cursed, hexed, poisoned, or knocked unconscious in duels, it's Pomfrey who takes charge, alone. There is no mention of backup, nor are there magical healing assistants or diagnostic charms operated by anyone else. The woman even handles psychological trauma by herself, such as when she tried to remove Harry and Hermione from the hospital wing, so they wouldn't overhear distressing news. Is one nurse supposed to safeguard hundreds of magical children? The same scarcity applies to the academic staff. History of magic is taught by Professor Binns, a literal ghost, who drones on about goblin rebellions, seemingly immune to student needs or feedback. But who assigned Binns to keep teaching after death? Is there a Department of Magical Education regulating staff turnover? If Binns died and simply continued teaching out of habit, is Hogwarts truly so understaffed that even death doesn't qualify a professor for retirement? Surely the living staff would have noticed the students falling asleep or losing interest, yet no one replaces him. Is this negligence or tradition? The library, though vast and mysterious, is overseen solely by Madame Pince. Described as vulture-like and overly protective of her books, she polices the library with grim efficiency. But Hogwarts is not just any school. It's home to restricted sections, cursed tomes, and magical texts with minds of their own. There are no additional librarians, no library elves cataloguing books, no student volunteers shelving or restoring damaged volumes. The library contains dangerous magical knowledge, but its supervision rests in the hands of one strict and suspicious woman. If she falls ill, does the library shut down? More baffling is the absence of magical specialists like counselors or mentors. After Cedric Diggory's death, there was no mention of grief counseling or trauma support for the students. Dumbledore addresses the school with emotion and integrity, yet expects teenagers to process death on their own. Even after Dumbledore himself dies, students are left largely to their own devices. No therapist, healer, or magical advisor steps in. Are children just expected to bottle up their trauma until adulthood, or does magic simply deny the need for emotional care? Even the infamous caretaking duties fall on a single man, Argus Filch, a squib with no magical ability. He's responsible for cleaning the entire castle, disciplining students, and maintaining order. Hogwarts is enormous, with winding staircases, moving portraits, forbidden corridors, and dungeons. How can one man, without magic, manage the entire maintenance load? And although Filch has Mrs. Norris, his watchful cat, there are no spells mentioned to help him clean, nor any house elf labour allocated to janitorial duties. If house elves maintain the kitchens and possibly assist behind the scenes, why not assign magical support to a caretaker with no magic? Even during the Triwizard Tournament, where the school hosted international visitors and dangerous challenges, there were no additional staff brought in. The professors organised elaborate and risky events, including underwater missions and battles with dragons, yet there were no visible logistical teams or magical security. Professor McGonagall, Professor Snape, and Professor Dumbledore handled everything, as if these few individuals possessed limitless energy and expertise. No assistants, no substitute teachers, no additional referees or examiners. When Moody was teaching Defense Against the Dark Arts, nobody noticed he was actually Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise for an entire school year. How could so few staff manage to notice, or fail to notice, such a massive deception? Then there's the matter of househeads, who are each also full-time teachers. Professor Sprout is the head of Hufflepuff and teaches herbology. Professor Flitwick manages Ravenclaw while teaching charms. They mentor their students, coordinate house events, manage discipline, and attend staff meetings, in addition to their full teaching loads. It is never mentioned that they receive support from deputy heads of house or resident advisors. Are the professors expected to handle every single issue, from emotional conflicts to academic disputes, entirely on their own? The invisibility of behind-the-scenes staff further complicates the image of Hogwarts. There are no groundskeepers beyond Hagrid. There are no visible security guards, no technical staff ensuring that magical wards remain active. When students roam the halls at night, only a handful of professors and Filch seem to patrol them. The castle is known to contain forbidden areas like the third-floor corridor and the Room of Requirement, but these zones are left unmonitored. Hogwarts is filled with secrets, and perhaps the biggest one is how it doesn't collapse under its own disorganization. The only conceivable explanation is that magic replaces bureaucracy. But even that argument falls apart when one remembers that most of the professors, like McGonagall, are often exhausted. Dumbledore's need to occasionally step in and correct things personally shows that even the headmaster cannot rely entirely on magical systems. When Harry faces detention in the Forbidden Forest, it's Hagrid who escorts him, not a staff of teachers or magical enforcers. Every task, from supervision to punishment to healthcare, seems to rest on the shoulders of a tiny circle of overworked adults. Even in moments of crisis, such as the Chamber of Secrets being opened, there's no crisis management team. Professors teach by day and investigate monsters by night. When students are petrified, the school simply locks down parts of the castle and hopes for the best. The Ministry of Magic sends only one incompetent official, Gilderoy Lockhart, to assist rather than allocating trained personnel. It's as if Hogwarts exists in a vacuum, where magical staffing needs are ignored for the sake of narrative simplicity or nostalgia. The reality is unsettling. The most prestigious magical school in Britain appears to be run by a skeleton crew. There are no hall monitors, no technical support, no lunch supervisors, no administrative staff. No wonder students are always sneaking off into trouble. There's hardly anyone watching. When readers think of Hogwarts, they remember moving staircases and enchanted feasts. But behind the wonder lies a question Rowling never fully addressed. Who actually runs the place? And how long can it last before even magic proves insufficient?